Here's Mike Winters.
And welcome back to the morning show. And joining us in studio this morning from the Rio Grande Foundation, it's been a while, but Paul Gessing back with us. Morning, Paul.
Hey, Mike. Good to be with you.
Good to be back, and good to have you back, and great to see you back. And he's actually down visiting for a while as we record this for some stuff here in Roswell. But first, got to ask thoughts on this. We just wrapped up the legislative session here, 30-day. Lot of stuff coming out of this with bills being passed and money being spent and a lot of talk on crime and things. Your overall thoughts on the good, the bad, the ugly from this last 30 days?
It could have been a lot worse, for sure, especially when you have politicians saying before a legislative session that they have more money than they know what to do with.
That's scary.
And there are a bunch of progressive Democrats, by and large. That is definitely scary. They definitely spent their money, more than their money. They spent our money. And really, they spent a lot of oil and gas money, some of it being also dumped into New Mexico from the federal government, printed up in Washington, D.C. And we weren't going to avoid a massive spending uptick. So we got over $1 billion in new spending. The last budget was 7.4 or thereabouts. We're at 8.5 after this. That is a massive uptick. It's about a 14% year-on-year growth, which is completely unsustainable.
Sure.
And, quite frankly, we will talk about tax cuts, and there were tax cuts pushed through the session. Very welcome, but we could have done a lot more with that rather than spending all the money. But again, in New Mexico, with the progressive Democrats in charge and this governor, we were not going to get Rio Grande Foundation style policies.
That kind of, I want to ask about that. Speaking of money spending, one of the things that they did do this time was raises for teachers, things like that, which I'm not complaining, long overdue. My wife's a teacher. I'm happy about that stuff. But did that, in your opinion, is that happening this year because it's an election year, or is there more to it than that? I'm just wondering, was this the don't worry about all the stuff we're doing, here's some flakes over here while we do other things to the side, or was this a legitimate thing?
It's a combination.
Yeah.
First and foremost, inflation, as we know, is out of control. 7% or thereabouts. You can pick a number, but 7% is also the raises for the teachers. So in some ways, you could say it's not really a net raise for the teachers after all because of the inflation challenge that we're all facing. So there's that. There's obviously an election year. And there's obviously the fact that the governor wants to be seen as doing something for education after, and we will talk about this plenty at the Rio Grande Foundation, locking our kids out of school for a year and the devastating impacts of that. Obviously masking for much of the rest of the time during the pandemic, and the studies that are coming out about that. So if you can't do something to actually improve student outcomes and help the kids, you can throw money at the system and look like you're doing something. And I know that's a very cynical view, but as somebody who has children who used to be in the public school system and no longer are because of what's happened over the last 2 years, I think I'm in a pretty good position, both politically, policy analyst-wise, and, of course, as a parent as well.
Absolutely.
To understand this.
Well, and you always wonder at some point when people are going to say enough. I mean, you look at statistics for New Mexico, and you can almost pick any category in the area of statistics, education one of them, and we're always bottom or near the bottom of these things. And yeah, you can throw money at things for a while there, but at some point you got to say, what's wrong with the policies and what's going on here? And you hope at one point somebody wakes up and says, clearly throwing money at it's not going to work. We need to look at what else is wrong here and why are we still at the bottom?
Exactly. And something I like to always talk about after a session is the dogs that don't bark, because it's easy to talk about the little chihuahuas that are always doing their thing and the issues that do come up in a particular legislative session. But real education reform, school choice, and reforming our system hasn't come up. And it doesn't come up because the teacher unions control the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party controls New Mexico. It's a very ironclad relationship there. So that's a real issue. Republicans have introduced bills to kind of take the money and put it behind the students instead of the bureaucracies. but they don't have any power in Santa Fe, and those bills tend to go absolutely nowhere.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think it's going to really take that kind of real rethinking of the system, and it's happening in other states. Numerous other states are passing laws to put the money behind the students, and these are some states like West Virginia that, actually I put West Virginia in the category of states that most resemble New Mexico politics-wise, economics-wise, socially, among the states. And West Virginia, they've made a shift to the right politically, and they've also embraced this money follow the students. So it's going to be a process, because anytime you do that kind of thing, you get lawsuits, and it's going to be slow. But if that system makes its way into effect,
right,
it will have a positive impact. And the other dog that didn't bark, and I'll throw this out there because it's related also to COVID, is Representative Greg Nybert has been the champion. It's been bipartisan, with Democrats of a certain extent getting on to the effort to restrain the governor's powers, not just this governor, but future governors in an emergency. And that's something that is very important to the Rio Grande Foundation. We very much support, kind of the constitutional concept, separation of powers, all that stuff you learned in Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, exactly.
And the idea that one person, whoever they may be, should be making policies for the state by themselves for practically 2 years is not healthy for the state, the economy, and it's something that we really need to change. And unfortunately, Representative Nybert's legislation did not get really even a serious hearing during either session or the special sessions that have happened since last year. So those are kind of two of the dogs that didn't bark, so to speak, with this legislature.
Gotcha. So just out of curiosity, do you think they're going to bring it back for the 60-day next year heavy, or do you think they're going to let it die?
Well, my hope is that we get a better political situation up there.
We do have an election
Santa
between
Fe.
now and then. Yes.
We have an election. I'm going to definitely talk to Representative Nybert. My hope is that you even get a better legislative opportunity there, in terms of if you have the chance to actually pass something that maybe you don't need to compromise it at the beginning. I think 30 days, 60 days, whatever the time period is fine. But to further really improve the bill, you need some kind of definition of what an emergency might be, because it's not a conspiracy. The conspiracy theory always used to be, that's just something you dismiss out of hand. Now, after 2 years of COVID, you're like, that conspiracy theory really turned out.
Let's put stuff on the table.
Yeah, there's been a lot of those. So I think a lot of us are concerned that things like climate change will become the emergencies of the future, and we need to be able to define some of these non-emergency emergencies out of the equation for the purposes of empowering one person, even for a 30 or 60-day time period.
Let's talk election a little bit here and talk with the governor's race here. First, I want to ask, we've got our four candidates on the Republican side here. We obviously know who the Democrat's going to be here. We did have a few Republicans drop out and go independent here. Just from the logic you're hearing, is it just because of too crowded race on this side, or did they feel like they weren't getting? What was the logic behind trying to separate themselves from the Republican Party there?
Well, I think there's different groups that have done different things. There's Luis Sanchez, who's going to run for Congress, and I'm sure redistricting may have affected that decision, because when people declared for the governorship, they may not have known how those districts were going to be drawn, and the Democrats went pretty aggressive with their redistricting plans. So those seats, obviously Southeast New Mexico, kind of the epicenter for some of the controversy associated with those congressional districts. But splitting up Southeast New Mexico does provide an opportunity for some new people on the conservative side to get into these races. So, not gaining traction in that race, maybe seeing the writing on the wall there. Then, of course, the Libertarians still being a major party. So folks like Karen Bedoni jumping into that. And you've got four really serious candidates on the Republican side for governor. And, maybe they didn't think Governor Lujan Grisham would be vulnerable, but clearly she's popping up on these national lists as being a vulnerable governor. And I think that is an accurate statement. She's got a lot of money, but I think the right Republican could give her not just a run for her money, but possibly beat her.
And the Democratic Party right now isn't exactly solidarity one thing. There's a big crack in that party at the moment, too, here in New Mexico and across.
Numerous big cracks.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you've got the Cheryl Williams Stapleton scandal that is still working its way through the legal system. Voters have to be concerned about that, getting back to the education conversation. Then you have the DUI Representative Georgine Lewis situation, Brian Egolf riding off into the sunset, so to speak. And that wasn't, I mean, he can say that was all about spending time with the family, but there were obvious divisions within the Democratic caucus. Miguel Garcia, representative from South Valley and Albuquerque, expressed some consternation about Egolf's management style. And we did that as well. I'll go, we're not part of the Democrat coalition, but we definitely expressed our concerns. And I think anybody with half a brain would have some concerns about the way he has approached things this year and over the years.
Sure.
And then, of course, now you've got a sexual harassment issue with Daniel Ivey Soto, a state senator. And I happen to think that it's more driven by politics, internal again to the Democratic Party, than a real issue with Ivey Soto.
Sure. But in this day and age, that's enough.
It's not good just to have that. Ivey Soto had that some impacts on that election bill. And I say that election bill because it was SB 8, then there's SB 6 in there as well. SB 144 is what it wound up being, and then that got killed. And so I really question the motives of somebody bringing up a 6-year-old case of sexual harassment. But that cannot help the Democratic caucus as they head into this November in the elections.
Sure. I want to talk about one more issue here before we let you get back to it. Redistricting here. Chavez County, as you know, we now will be represented by all 3 congressional districts. CD2, Yvette Harrell, who's been our representative for here, now pretty much just covers the boot hill of our county, and now we're the rest of the counties in the other districts here. How do you expect? What does that mean for us? I mean, a lot of people are upset because of representation. We get swallowed up, depending on part of where you're at here, Roswell. You're kind of in the Bernalillo County, Albuquerque part of it. Is there any silver lining here? Is it good, bad, ugly? I mean, I got to imagine that has to make Chavez County a battleground area for these representatives come election time. I mean, is it as bad as it seems, or is it as bad as it seems?
Well, it's pretty bad in the sense that the Democrats clearly intended to neuter, if you will, southeastern New Mexico, not just Chavez County,
Sure.
but all of southeast New Mexico and its political influence in these races. And obviously, the goal for the Democrats is to make all 3 members of the House here in New Mexico Democrats. Brian Egolf spelled that out. If you want to get back to qualms we all have with Brian Egolf, that's another one. But I think the opportunity here and what could work out well, not just for Chavez County, but southeast New Mexico, is that you're taking 1 seat, making it more competitive, and then making the other 2 seats more competitive as well in a year in which I think it's safe to say at this point, Republicans should be on the upswing in terms of making inroads in not just New Mexico, but in races across the country. So you could wind up, yes, you're going to be split allegiances, but you could also have more favorable representation in those seats once all is said and done. So,
gotcha.
I think the question, I guess, logistically will be, Albuquerque remains the population center in some ways for all of these seats and could be the epicenter. We could have 3 representatives representing New Mexico being from Albuquerque, and that's not ideal, obviously. you could theoretically have them here in southeast New Mexico, but you don't have the population. And it's going to be tough for somebody from southeast New Mexico, which, quite frankly, culturally is a lot more different from the rest of the state than Albuquerque is from the rest of the state. So it's not great for the state, and I think that they did that on purpose. And all I can say to that is that it just gives you further impetus for all your voters to get out and get fired up for November, and really make sure that the folks who did that to this area, don't get away with it scot-free. Obviously, we've got 10 years before the next redistricting, and God knows what's going to happen by then. But that's the next time you'll have a chance at those lines.
Sure. We're about out of time here, but if folks want to learn more about the Rio Grande Foundation, perhaps even get involved in some of the doings of the Rio Grande Foundation, what's the best way to reach out and learn more?
Yeah, so we blog regularly at something called errorsofenchantment.com. This is kind of our day-to-day updated website where we really outline our latest thoughts and research on certain issues. RioGrandeFoundation.org has not only information about the foundation, but it has our Freedom Index right now, which is our vote tracking site for the legislature. We do floor votes only. You can find out how various members of the delegation to the legislature in southeast New Mexico did on issues of limited government individual liberty. And so we assign point totals to the bills and point totals to the legislators themselves, and that's definitely worth checking out. So those are the two primary ways, and our contact information if they want to give us a call, shoot us an email. That's all on those websites.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, folks, I know we've been talking municipal election, and I always say, educate yourself. When I always tell people, I don't almost care who you vote for as long as you do it educated with reasons you believe in and things like that. And that's no different with our bigger elections too, with our elections for governor, representatives in the House and Senate, and of course our president here. And the Rio Grande Foundation is, I know I've known you for years, and you guys really do a great job of trying to give information to people that isn't filtered with the political spin, with the stuff that comes with that, and say, look, here's the good and the bad, the ugly of the decisions being made. And that way, you know the straight scoop. And then when you do go to make your votes, you're voting for policy and not politics.
Exactly. Thank you, Mike.
And thank you. We look forward to seeing you. We'll see you again soon. All right, Paul?
Now for the Pecos Valley